that's also part of what all dictators do, starting with the fascists. Hitler and Mussolini set themselves up as the only arbiter of truth, as the true truth tellers against the establishment. So there's that, like only they are taking the risk and trying to warn people. And so they become these rogue figures.
A critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in the subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Steve Hassan with another episode of Cults, Culture, and Coercion. And I'm very excited to be with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth and I met initially years ago for the dangerous case of Donald Trump, I believe, in D.C. At least that's my memory, Ruth. Ruth has written a very important book for our times called Strongman, Mussolini to the Present, which examines how liberal leaders use corruption, violence, propaganda, and machismo to stay in power, and how resistance to them has unfolded over a century. Ruth is a scholar. She's a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. And she's all about explaining to the public about fascism, authoritarianism, propaganda, democracy, protection. She's on TV, all kinds of networks. She does consulting for films. And recently, Ruth invited me to her Substack called Lucid. So we got to talk with 300-odd folks who are following her. Important work, and I said, Ruth, you've got to come on my podcast so we can share your expertise with my folks.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So, my goodness, it just feels so heavy and around the world with so many crises and wars and violence and threats and strongmen emerging in different countries. Just recently, Argentina elected a right-wing libertarian who wants to tear down government and is espousing all kinds of very dangerous rhetoric. And the media is basically saying in the form of Trump, which we hear all the time in the United States. So I think your work is especially important. And so can we maybe start with your interest in this topic and then your latest book about Mussolini and strongmen?
Sure. So I grew up in California in a town, Pacific Palisades, that was a place and towns around it where a lot of exiles from Nazism settled. And I didn't hear too much about Nazism and the Holocaust in my own family because my father's a Sephardic Jew from the Middle East and my mother's from Scotland and is Christian. So I didn't have that lineage of many American Jews. But I started, the traces of these people were visible in my town, and some of their kids and grandkids were there. And Arnold Schoenberg's son was a teacher at my school. So I started thinking, how terrible to have to leave your country and resettle halfway around the world. And that's what got my interest peaked at the beginning about dictatorships. And then I ended up working on Italy because there wasn't as much done, especially the themes I was interested of collaboration. So I've always been interested in now, most recently with the GOP, clinging to Trump for dear life, why people submit to power, why they believe the lies the leader tells them, and what the devastating results of that are when it's scaled up.
Mm-hmm. Great. So basically, I didn't realize you were Jewish. I am too, even though my last name sounds like I may be Sephardic or a Muslim. But so, yeah, the Holocaust, Nazism, fascism is very much, it seems, more and more empowered, from my perspective, through the internet and through hacking of people's data and tweaking behind the scenes. That's my perception of it anyway. But so tell us more about Mussolini. I know Trump really looked up to Mussolini, or at least that's my recollection and my research when I wrote the book.
Yeah, also Steve Bannon is a huge admirer of Mussolini. And, you know, Mussolini gets a short shrift because, you know, everybody focuses on Hitler. But Mussolini was the teacher of Hitler. And Mussolini was in power a long time before Hitler. And Hitler admired Mussolini so much for having gotten to power so quickly. Because Mussolini created fascism in 1919, and by 1922 he was already prime minister. You know, Hitler took him a whole decade. So Hitler had a bust of Mussolini on his desk in the 20s in Munich, and other Nazis would ridicule him because he kept writing to Mussolini, trying to get his autograph. And then, you know, eventually the tables were turned. But Mussolini has so much to teach us because it's more relevant than Hitler for today, because Mussolini was a prime minister of a democracy for 3 years. And he was kind of inventing this as he went along. And he was, you know, declared the first right-wing dictatorship in 1925 to escape prosecution because he had engineered and ordered the murder of the top socialist who was very beloved, Giacomo Matteotti, and he was implicated. And he was going to go down. People were pressuring him to resign. And so he took this leap and decided to declare dictatorship so he could fire the special prosecutors and then, you know, send everybody into exile or jail. But he did it to save his skin. So there's many lessons
and parallels,
and that's what allowed me. I am not a scholar of American history, although I'm obviously, you know, born here and raised here. But as soon as I saw Trump doing his loyalty oaths, talking about committing violence and being loved for violence, his famous "I could stand on Fifth Avenue" speech, which was very early, January 2016. So I tracked all of this, and I was already writing about Trump very early, as you were, because, you know, you and I come from different perspectives, but Trump was he was very familiar from the very start. The things I saw him doing just struck me with great dread. And so I put aside an academic book I was doing on World War II, and I started, you know, writing kind of full time with CNN, and then I ended up writing Strongmen, which goes from Mussolini up to Trump, to kind of put as a warning to Americans that you know what they were seeing had happened many times before, and it could happen in their own country too.
Yeah, and there's imitation and copycatism. As you mentioned, Hitler was studying the playbook from Mussolini. And you also mentioned Steve Bannon, who is not enough held accountable for the chaos and mess that we're in, because he was put into the Trump campaign by the Mercers, if I remember correctly, after they used Cambridge Analytica to hack Facebook, get all that data. And they insisted that Bannon be moved in to help run the campaign, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And he's a chaos agent. He wants to burn everything down.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to communicate with my book was to debunk the myths about these guys, that they are good for the nation, that they're constructive, that they're good for the economy, and to show the terrible outcomes they bring. And also their kind of personality profile. And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't use words like narcissism or sociopath, but I do trace a kind of personality profile. And unfortunately for us, Trump fits all of it: the sadism, the impulsivity, the grandiosity, the kind of insecurity covered up by bullying. They all have the same variations of the same personality. The outcomes are different because we have fewer one-party states outside of communism, but the destruction looks different, but it's there in every case. Because the sad thing, and it very much gets into the follower-leader relationship, which you're such an expert on, is that they despise the people who follow them. And the more people put their trust in them, the more they just see them as assets to exploit and dupes.
Yeah.
People.
So
Please, this is your thing.
No, I was just going to add. So malignant narcissism is the term I like to use for cult leaders of all stripes. And that's the narcissism, which is the lack of empathy, but the grandiosity, need for attention, need for praise, but fundamentally from a very insecure sense of self. But then the malignant part, this is from Erich Fromm's writing, thinking they're above the law, the pathological lying, the sadism, the paranoia, the threats. So you can go down the whole list. In fact, I did chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump, comparing Trump with my former cult leader, Sun Myung Moon, Hubbard of Scientology, and Jim Jones. And we recently just had the 45th anniversary of the tragedy massacre and the assassination of a congressman by Jim Jones. So I wanted to just nail that one down, because from my, sitting where I sit, I want everyone to study these characteristics, because there are many different cults happening on the internet and relationships. And if people know these qualities, they can protect themselves from 80 to 90% of every mind controller type of thing. And then to your other point about these strongmen not really respecting their followers, what came to mind for me was, I think it was Fred Trump telling his son, or I should say Drumpf, which was the original name before they Americanized it, Drumpf. I love that. We should all rebrand, as John Oliver, the comedian, said, Trump, make Donald Drumpf again. In any case, his father taught him you have to eat or be eaten. So you're either the apex predator eating everybody else for food, or you're going to get swallowed. So the mentality is not egalitarian, respect for others, but just eat, eat, eat. And of course, he's obese on top of that. Forgive me for adding that.
And to destroy and totally, so when Trump is not respecting gag orders, when his people won't respect, including congressmen, subpoenas, his goal is at every moment, because his goal is to take down American democracy, to destroy it,
right,
to tame it. And so he has to show scorn for the rule of law. He has to show scorn for the justice system and all the judges and all the prosecutors at every moment. And he's relentless as a propagandist, as a kind of shaper of emotions in this way. And so people think, oh, he's just being rebellious, or he's just he's just like being a victim. And the victimhood's very important, but the destructiveness is never losing an opportunity to totally discredit and get people to think of the justice system as part of the deep state, which he's been able to do beautifully. So he's played all the notes, he's gotten all the narratives, some of which pre-existed him, like the deep state stuff, beautifully, to the point where the more he's indicted, etc., the more he's a hero to people.
Yeah. So I may be going out on a limb, but not really, because I wrote a book called The Cult of Trump, but I put Putin at the top of the puppeteers, and I actually interviewed Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets in a two-header interview. And Yuri Shvets said, I was in the KGB and I was much higher than Vladimir was, and we recruited Trump decades earlier as an asset. And it was the first time somebody from the former Soviet Union dictatorship said something that overt. And basically Putin was horrified. The Soviet Union fell. He was a KGB operative, and he's been on a revenge vendetta to destroy America ever since.
That's right.
Using his oil money and power to infiltrate, to lobby, to buy off congressmen, senators, and to encourage the NRA. Why? Because he wants Americans to kill each other. He loves to say to his people, look at Americans. They don't protect their school children. People go in with assault rifles. We protect you.
That's right.
So does she, I should add. And we know Marina Butina infiltrated the NRA. She's now a parliamentarian in Russia. So the whole fourth generation psychological warfare toolkit of William Lynn's that I wrote about, and he wrote about in 1980, of going after experts so people don't trust experts, going after science itself, which is great if you want to do climate science denial. Let's attack all of science. Let's attack all democratic institutions. So the playbook, of how to create uncertainty and fear and anxiety and keep pressing those buttons to make people so afraid renders them less thinking about who is this person, and is this person actually got any policies that are going to help my children, my family survive? No, it's all about subverting people's critical faculties and indoctrinating into a kind of mindless lemming-like, I got to follow no matter what, because he says with certainty that he has the truth and he has the answer. And that, I saw you nodding a lot. So what do you think?
That's all starting with the fascists, and Hitler and Mussolini set themselves up as the only arbiter of truth, as the true truth tellers against the establishment. So there's that, like only they are taking the risk and trying to warn people. And so they become these rogue figures, or not become, they start out advertising themselves as these rogue figures, which is what Trump was doing with his standing on Fifth Avenue and shooting someone. They're like outlaws who are risking their life for the truth. And Trump has been faithful to that message through up to now, where he says, his new thing is, they're not going after me. They are going after me, but they really want you. I'm just standing in the way. And that's the same kind of, I'm going to take the hit for you. And so they become like a hero and a martyr. And these are also very old archetypes, right? And they're religious, of course. And Silvio Berlusconi used to call himself the Jesus Christ of Italian politics, because he said he's the savior and he's the martyr. So they all do this. They all use this victimhood stuff, and also the only one who can save the nation. And so as Trump was, out there operating, and I was doing the research on all these different dictators, he was checking all the boxes. It's unbelievable. And then, having religious allies who proclaim he's there by the will of God. So this is why I've called him a cult leader, and many people think they still today think that's exaggerated. But the guy's going to Waco, Texas. Like, how much more explicit does it need to be that you kick your campaign off in Waco? I don't know why. I don't know. I do know why, but people, it's very frightening to think, to kind of understand the full magnitude and gravity of this dangerous person. And people don't want to go there, but they have to, because otherwise they're not understanding. That's why your expertise is so valuable now, because that's what we're faced with.
Yeah. So, the standoff between the ATF and the FBI and David Koresh in Waco, Texas, with the Branch Davidians was a symbol used by extremists, white nationalists of government overreach. The government clearly didn't know what they were doing. They didn't understand cult mind control, apparently, because they thought David Koresh was a con man, even though I kept trying to let them know that they're sabotaging their own effectiveness at getting a peaceful resolution there. And then, of course, we know Timothy McVeigh bombed the federal building in because he was so angry and upset with the government. And there's a lot of people who've now been recruited into this ideology that makes the government just plain evil. And of course, the fossil fuel groups, and I've just interviewed someone who wrote a book on the Koch corporate empire, which is the second largest private corporation in the United States. Most of their money is from fossil fuels. They want to create distraction and uncertainty and make people not trust the government or government regulations. Like, let's get the government out of it so they can pillage and destroy our country and the earth. The whole habitat is going because of this totalist ideology.
And it's really important to connect the dots the way that you do. And it's really, really important to have people understand that the disinformation, the dark money, is to enable plunder, and that Trumpistan 1.0, he rolled back over 100 environmental regulations. So people think of, what we're going to call it, authoritarianism or fascism. They think of it as imposing controls, and it is. But there's a whole other part, which is allowing, so some people have controls on them. Others have more liberty to plunder than they ever dreamed of. And that includes breaking the law in myriad ways, if you're, in the government or in the paramilitaries. And so in this case, you have these very wealthy, hugely powerful people whose livelihood depends on this. And so, but people are not connecting the dots often enough.
Yeah, I would challenge the use of the term livelihood depends, because they're usually billionaires.
Yes,
and
yes.
This is about power.
I meant their business model. I guess I meant their business model.
Right, exactly. So I want to come back to the I am the victim, or I'm taking this for you, and the false connection that these dictators do with their followers to get them to mentally identify with the strong men. And then I also want to call out the technique of projection. So the lies, the constant lies, that's a technique to indoctrinate. But the projection of the Democrats are doing a coup, the other are the people who are really dangerous. I'm just trying to help you all out. When in fact, if one can only step out of the bubble of the constant bombardment of social media and Fox and other media disinformation channels and look objectively at the facts, it's very clear that we are in danger of losing our country's democracy and rule of law. And I'm just really so distressed that people are not stepping back and unplugging for more hours. You know, the average American is on their smartphone 8 hours or more a day. And the human mind is not meant to be online that many hours a day, but somehow this has now become the normal.
Yeah.
And it's not normal for humans to be in a digital artificial environment.
No, and this is a huge problem if you think about emotional retraining too, because the more people, you see this with the most recently with the Israel Hamas war, people are very inflamed. People are also, especially on TikTok, being kind of weaponized to take positions that are they're the opposite of nuanced. And the
Right.
people who win out from those moments, which autocrats know how to exploit, and terrorists, and they, the terrorists and autocrats are overlapping categories, and they create chaos, they create fear, but they create chaos and situations that everything is turned upside down, so that they can pose themselves as a solution.
Right.
So social media, actually, it's interesting because in my book, I have a chapter on propaganda, and I go over 100 years. And what I found is there are certain principles for propaganda. It requires repetition, but actually requires repetition with small variations, that you have the same message coming to people from, with different media, different areas of society, but there's the party line or the cult line too. And what social media does is it hugely accelerates this because of the scale and scope of the messages. And also that in the old days, like the 1930s, let's say, you consumed passively. You read the newspaper, you listened to the radio, and now you repost, you retweet, and you add your meme, you add your message, and so the propaganda circulates and it seems fresh. So that repetition with variations is built into the action of social media, and that's why Trump used it so effectively in 2016 to get elected.
Yep. And I'll just share, I was invited in 2015 to an Aspen Institute invitation only gathering about countering ISIS recruitment online. And there were a lot of big shots in the room: Rich Stengel from the State Department Counterterrorism, and Madeleine Albright, and Richard Haas, and Anne-Marie Slaughter, Monica Biggert from Facebook, and Scott. Anyway, a man presented about his research on recruitment online, and he demonstrated an AI supercomputer system. This was August of 2015. And he talked about how he could track memes online in real time in 20 different languages, and how you could track if a meme was gathering steam. You could amplify it, or you could create a distraction and a more potent crazy story that would move people to follow a different meme. And so this overload of craziness was about meme manipulation, and the public is oblivious to the fact of how much we're being manipulated by bad actors who are trying to subvert our democracy through the use of this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very apt name for the Kremlin information warfare, and it is war, right? It's war by other means, is the fire hose of falsehood. And so the volume of stuff is very important because it's overwhelming to people, and then it can cause people to actually become depoliticized and demobilized. And that's what many dictators in history, like Franco, that's what they've wanted. Because there are different kinds of dictatorships. If they're going to imperialist conquest, they need the population to be like, combat ready, let's say. But other times, they want people to be distanced from politics or be too afraid to lift their heads up. And so using, propaganda is together, and it works together with threat and violence. Actually, real violence in many cases. And we're getting there in the United States. Threat is now woven into the methods of the GOP, as is violence. And we're kind of in denial about that, which is why people are still not wanting to deal with January 6th. Which almost worked and sent all the lawmakers in our country running for their lives. They haven't wanted to deal with the fact that senators and others who are among the most powerful people in our country with access to any resources they need, security, etc., are crying secretly because they're afraid of Trump from when they were acquitting him of his impeachments. None of this, people really, it should be on page one. It should have always been on page one, and instead, it's just people. There's just like a cognitive dissonance, like inability to deal with these psychological, social, authoritarian kind of dynamics. And so that's what I know. That's your work, and that's what my work has been, to try and point out these dynamics, because they're structuring our country right now, and they have a very bad outcome in history and in the present.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of important points you made. I'd like to start by just commenting on the fire hose of propaganda technique, and Russia calls it active measures. The idea is you throw out a lot of crap and you see what sticks, what gets some traction, and then you send your agents and the troll farms to amplify those things. That's how QAnon got going as a psyop. There were other psyops before QAnon, like Cicada 3301. But the idea is you throw things out and then you watch the reactions, and then you amplify and you polarize. You make the left more extremist and you make the right more extremist. So there's higher polarization and less common ground. The common ground is what a democracy like America is supposedly founded on, that there's a common good for all of society. But now the left demonizes the right demonizes the left, and we are losing the nuance. Everything becomes, under the T of the bite model, black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them.
Yeah.
Simplistic little bite-sized nuggets of mind control. I also want to comment, if you don't mind, Ruth, that human beings think that we're rational beings and that we're choosing things independently, and that's just not reality. We now know a lot about social science. We know a lot now about neuroscience. And in fact, we are human beings. We're human animals, and we have a nervous system that can get overloaded or can get hacked very easily. And human beings need to understand that what's normal for us is that we may think we know what something is, but unless we've had training in it, or we've had, read books by scholars on a particular subject, we have beliefs that we know things, and we have this illusion we can just Google something and become an expert. But there's just so much disinformation on Wikipedia and other places. And what I'm trying to get to is that, back to the lawmakers and such, the lawmakers are largely operating off of a human paradigm of watching the others in their group, the GOP, and following the herd, because there's safety in numbers, and then there's that fear and threats that they're going to be defeated in the primaries if they speak out. and break ranks. But that's what is necessary, is for leaders to step up and actually think for themselves and think about things and do the right thing, even if it means that they're not going to get reelected, possibly. But that's what is really going to be needed in the coming years, I think.
I agree. And we see this, that it's called elite defection in regimes, when this is after that devastations are clear to everyone and elites start to peel away, and it's very dangerous. So they do it when they think the leader is, doesn't have a future anymore. But that's what you need, along with, sustained popular protest. So you need the top and the bottom to kind of come together. And but it's so, what's one of the saddest things, I think, having studied, actual authoritarian states, is that, as you were saying, the stakes are relatively low for these people. They won't get reelected. Now, the GOP has, incited all of its thugs to threaten their families and stuff. But even there, the solution is for all of them to band together against Trump. And it would be very easy to do so. They could have done it at the debates. It's just, there's all kinds of televised occasions that you can do that, and that would that would cause a huge amount of chaos, but there would be productive chaos to break the spell. But even though they're not going to be sent to jail, because it's not Mobutu's, Zaire or whatever, Gaddafi's Libya, they won't do it. None of them will do it.
Well, so my point of view is I can only say the truth as I know it, and I've experienced it, having been radicalized and woken up, and how did this happen to me, and being willing to say I trusted someone who was not trustworthy, Sun Myung Moon, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, but it is doable. And for me, Ruth, a very fruitful course of action, it would be to mobilize former members, particularly former MAGA recruiters and propagandists. I interviewed Rich Logis and others. Joe Walsh was one of the early defectors who just said, this is not... The minute Trump said he trusted Putin over the intelligence services, I'm out. Like, this was really obvious for him. But mobilizing the voices of people who had believed, who had supported Trump, and had been part of the GOP, and valiantly stood up and opposed it. I do still have hope, but we need to... Everyone needs to kind of regulate their own nervous system, and part of it is, I think, less time getting emotionally aroused by some of the social media memes that are so upsetting. Focus on what's within your control to do, like reach out to family and friends, reconnect with people, be warm, work locally. And if you have the ability to help organizations that have a real strategy, like, you can help fund that, and let's work together to for the next year, because it's very worrisome, the attacks on Biden. He's done so many good policies. Trump did almost nothing of any substance whatsoever, and the GOP had no platform. But Biden's been doing real things to affect real people. And so we need to stay focused on what's going to get us out of this mess. And it's adults in the room outlining a step-by-step plan.
I agree. Agree wholeheartedly.
So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I would love for you to share a little bit more, if you don't mind, about Mussolini and the fascism. It was so interesting for when you were talking about how Hitler was studying Mussolini, and how Bannon, really wanted to model after Mussolini. The public needs to learn more and read your book.
Yeah. So, Mussolini is he was the first to kind of chip away for the years he was prime minister of a democracy. It was a very limited democracy, and there'd been major violence. Fascism started as a decentralized militia movement. It's important that Americans know that. It was in the countryside. It was like the precinct strategy, as Bannon calls it. They took control of local towns. They would go with their cars and their flags and their trucks, and they would make incursions, they called them, into these towns. They would take over school boards, trade unions. They would, and Italy had a huge socialist, reformist socialist party. So all of that was destroyed, but it did it locally. And then Mussolini united them into a movement and did this kind of stage this march on Rome. And the king, who was in charge of the armed forces, and it was after World War I, many people were, had expertise, shall we say. He could have called out the armed forces against the squadrists at any time. They were never more than 30,000 converging on Rome, and he didn't. He was too timid. So he invited Mussolini in, and that's what happened to Hitler. But Mussolini was the first to be invited in by conservative elites, and they thought they could use him. So it's the Hitler playbook was provided by Mussolini, and so that's one thing. The other is that he got into power very fast, and then he declared a dictatorship. And it took a few years for him to set up his police state. And that was one reason Hitler wanted to do everything very fast, because he didn't like this gradualist, thing. But Mussolini also was the first to kind of have this whole biopolitical state. In 1927, he gave a landmark speech that introduced what he called like therapeutic politics, where you were going to have a demographic increase. The battle became the battle for births. And he talked about how non-whites were having too many babies and they were at the door. And you had to increase white Christian births. And this is the speech where he said that there are too many rats bringing yellow fever and Bolshevism into Italy, so we have to kill them. And he was talking about public health and actual rats, but he was talking about people. So the vermin stuff that Trump uses is not just from Hitler, it's from Mussolini. And again, it's 1927. Hitler was not going anytime soon going to be in power. Right. So it's really the Great Replacement theory, everything traces back to him. And so we really need to learn much more about him. And he stayed in power for over 20 years. Hitler was like just, 13 years. So he was way more successful in a funny way than Hitler, and taught Hitler a lot, even though all we remember is Hitler was the top dog and Hitler eventually invaded northern Italy. But that was later.
Right. And so aside from reading your book and seeing you on TV, people can go to your Substack, and you decided to call it Lucid. Tell us about that choice.
Yeah, so I, like you, was very concerned about disinformation, about people being guided to do things that are against their interest. Because the essence of also cults, but I'll stick to my area of expertise, authoritarianism, is to get people to act against their interests, to support people who take their rights away. And so I knew I wanted to do a civic education, mission, let's say, through this Substack that would illuminate people, that would educate people. So I came up with the idea of the title Lucid because of the connotation to that, and having our minds clear, having clarity. And so I write essays every week, and I have, as you know, because you were a guest, I have Q&As where people can ask me questions directly. And that's all part of the kind of civic education.
Yeah, it's such important work. I'm very grateful to you. And I hope that we can I don't know, get a meeting together of brilliant academics and scholars, but also former members, and map out a counter plan, which to me is just really about teaching people the facts of, you want freedom? These are the qualities to look for in leaders, where they're accountable and they delegate to people smarter than them and more knowledgeable than them, and that if they make a mistake, they apologize and are accountable to it, where there's checks and balances, so there's no abuses or limits abuses and such. We really need a plan that people can get behind and have hope going forward, because it just seems so much like people are tuning out.
Yeah.
Because they're so overwhelmed by
the
distress.
Well, we will continue to collaborate and work on these weighty problems.
So,
thank you.
Ruth Ben-Ghiat, professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. Her latest book is called Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Influence Continuum.
Thank you.
Thank you.